Chapter 1. A Strange Encounter in the Desert. The desert planet Zura 7 was a realm of extremes. During the day, the golden sands burned under the twin suns, radiating heat so intense that even advanced survival suits strained to maintain a livable temperature. At night, the world transformed into a frozen wasteland, the clear skies revealing countless stars in their unblinking gaze. Dr. Ethan Carter, a xenobiologist renowned for his work in cataloging alien life forms, had come to Zura 7 not for its barren landscapes, but for its hidden secrets. Ancient ruins, rumored to be remnants of a once flourishing civilization, dotted the planet's surface, buried beneath shifting dunes. Ethan had spent weeks meticulously mapping these sites, searching for evidence of life in the desolation. Yet, in all that time, he hadn't seen a single sentient creature. That changed on the 22nd night. Ethan's camp was modest, a sturdy tent reinforced against the elements, solar-powered equipment for his research, and a small survival pod equipped with essentials. He had spent the day collecting samples from a nearby ruin, carefully documenting strange glyphs etched into the stone. By evening, he was poring over his findings inside the tent, surrounded by datapads, holographic projectors, and half-eaten ration packs. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the eerie wail of the shifting sands. Ethan had grown used to the sounds of the desert, but something about this night felt different. He paused, his pen hovering over his notes. There beneath the wind's cry was another sound, a faint, almost imperceptible moan. He froze, straining his ears. It came again, louder this time, sound of pain or distress. Grabbing his flashlight and sidearm, Ethan cautiously stepped out of the tent. The cold air bit at his skin through his thermal suit, and the sand whipped around him in chaotic spirals. "Hello?" he called, his voice muffled by the wind. "Is someone there?" The moaning grew louder, guiding him toward a shadowed figure stumbling across the dunes. As he approached, his flashlight beam illuminated the source. It was a humanoid figure, female, though clearly not human. Her lavender skin shimmered faintly under the light, and her eyes, large and feline, glowed with a faint, otherworldly hue. She wore a tattered garment that barely clung to her slim frame, and her body was marked with intricate, glowing patterns that pulsed weakly, like a fading heartbeat. "Help," she whispered in Galactic Common before collapsing into the sand. Ethan rushed to her side, kneeling as he checked for signs of life. Her breathing was shallow, her body trembling from cold and exhaustion. Without hesitation, he scooped her up and carried her back to his tent. Inside, he placed her gently on the cot and activated the environmental controls to raise the temperature. He retrieved a medical scanner from his kit and began a preliminary assessment. Her physiology was unlike anything he had encountered before, but the scanner registered hypothermia and severe dehydration, both treatable with the right interventions. Ethan administered a dose of universal rehydration serum, hoping it would be compatible with her biology. Then, he wrapped her in a thermal blanket and sat beside her, watching as her breathing slowly steadied. The glowing patterns on her skin began to brighten, their rhythm becoming more consistent. Hours passed before she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around, disoriented. When her gaze settled on Ethan, she flinched, pressing herself against the cot's edge. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe." She stared at him for a moment, then relaxed slightly. "Where am I?" "My camp," Ethan replied. "I found you outside. You were in bad shape." Her expression shifted to one of gratitude mixed with wariness. "You saved me." Ethan nodded. "Can you tell me your name? What happened to you?" She hesitated, as though deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "I am Lyra. My ship, it crashed. I was separated from my people." Her voice was melodic, each word laced with a faint accent that Ethan found intriguing. "I've been wandering for days," she continued. "I thought I would not survive." "Well, you're safe now," Ethan assured her. "I'll help you find your people, but first, you need to recover." Lyra nodded weakly, her glowing markings dimming as her eyes closed again. Ethan watched her for a moment before returning to his work. Despite the situation, he couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Lyra was no coincidence. Something about her presence felt significant. The next morning, Lyra awoke to the smell of something warm and savory. Ethan had prepared a simple meal using his limited supply synthetic protein stew and flatbread. She sat up slowly, her strength returning, and accepted the food with a nod of thanks. "Your markings," Ethan said as she ate. "They glow brighter when you're healthy, don't they?" Lyra looked at him, surprised by his observation. "Yes, they are. Linked to my life force. It is a trait of my kind." "And your kind is?" Ethan prompted gently. She hesitated again. "I am a Lori. My people once thrived across many worlds, but now we are scattered." Ethan recognized the name. The Alori were a reclusive race, rarely seen outside their homeworlds. What little was known about them came from fragmented accounts, most of which described them as enigmatic and fiercely protective of their secrets. "I've never met an Alori before," Ethan admitted. "You're different from what I expected." Lyra smiled faintly. "And you are different from what I was taught about humans." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden beeping from Ethan's console. He frowned and checked the monitor. It was a proximity alert. Something was approaching the camp. Lyra tensed, her glowing markings flaring. "They found me." "Who?" Ethan asked, but Lyra was already on her feet, her movements swift and fluid despite her earlier weakness. "They will not stop until I am captured," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "But I will not go back." Ethan grabbed his sidearm and stepped outside, scanning the horizon. In the distance, he saw a group of figures advancing through the sand, their silhouettes distorted by the heat haze. They moved with purpose, their weapons glinting under the sun. "Friends of yours?" Ethan asked dryly. Lyra shook her head. "Hunters. They pursue my kind for profit." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't about to let Lyra be taken. "Stay inside," he said. "I'll handle this." Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm. "You don't understand. If they find me, they will not spare you." Ethan met her gaze, determination burning in his eyes. "Then we'll face them together." Lyra's markings flared brightly, her expression softening. "You are unlike any human I have known." As the hunters closed in, Ethan and Lyra prepared to defend the camp. What neither of them realized was that this moment marked the beginning of an alliance that would change the fate of more than just their lives, would alter the course of history for two very different worlds. Chapter 2. Sandstorm of Secrets. The desert wind howled with relentless fury, carrying waves of sand across the barren landscape. Ethan's heart pounded as the shadowy figures advanced toward the camp. The plasma rifles in their hands glowed faintly, casting ominous blue reflections off their sleek metallic armor. Ethan had never felt so outmatched. His sidearm, a modest energy pistol, seemed laughable in the face of such advanced weaponry. But surrendering wasn't an option, not while Lyra stood behind him. Inside the tent, Lyra crouched low, her glowing markings dimmed as if conserving energy. She peeked through the flap of the tent, her large feline eyes narrowing at the sight of the hunters. "Ethan," she called softly, her voice taut with urgency. "You cannot fight them alone. They are relentless, and their weapons are far superior to yours." Ethan glanced back at her. "Then help me. If you've got any tricks up your sleeve, now's the time." Lyra hesitated, her glowing hands trembling slightly. I will try." The approach of the hunters. The leader of the hunters stepped forward, his armored boots sinking slightly into the sand. His helmet was sleek, with a single glowing visor that scanned the area like a predator hunting prey. He raised a hand, signaling the others to halt. "Human!" The leader's voice boomed through his modulator, metallic and devoid of emotion. "Step aside. The Alori belongs to us. Interfere, and you'll meet the same fate." Ethan tightened his grip on the sidearm. His mind raced, weighing his options. He could see no cover, no escape route. The hunters had positioned themselves strategically, leaving no room for retreat. "Sorry," Ethan called back, his voice steadier than he felt. "But she's not going anywhere with you." The leader tilted his head, a gesture that might have been amusement or annoyance. "You don't understand, human. She is a fugitive, a valuable one. Stand down, and you might live to see another day." From the corner of his eye, Ethan saw Lyra step out of the tent, her glowing markings flaring brighter. "I am no fugitive," she said, her voice calm but firm. I am free, and I will not return to your chains. The leader's visor focused on her, and his posture stiffened. Then you leave us no choice. The storm unleashed. Before the hunters could act, Lyra's hand shot forward, and a wave of shimmering energy burst from her body. The ground beneath the hunters erupted, sending plumes of sand spiraling into the air. The desert itself seemed to come alive, the sand twisting and churning like a living entity. Ethan staggered back, shielding his face from the storm. Through the chaos, he glimpsed the hunters struggling to maintain their footing. Their armor protected them from the worst of the storm, but their visibility was compromised, their weapons firing blindly into the swirling sands. What the hell is this? Ethan shouted, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Lyra stood at the center of the storm, her glowing markings pulsing with a rhythmic intensity. Allori are not mere prey, she said, her voice carrying an unearthly resonance. We are the children of the desert, and the desert obeys us. Ethan watched in awe as the storm intensified, the sand forming a protective barrier around the camp. The hunters' silhouettes grew fainter, their shouts drowned out by the roaring wind. But then, Lyra stumbled, her glow flickering. She clutched her side, a grimace of pain crossing her face. Lyra! Ethan rushed to her side, catching her as she sagged against him. What's wrong? The storm. It takes energy, she said weakly. More than I expected. Ethan looked back at the hunters. They were regrouping, their armor glowing as it absorbed the brunt of the storm. It wouldn't hold them off for much longer. We need to get out of here, Ethan said, his voice urgent. Can you walk? Lyra nodded, though her steps were unsteady. Yes, but we must hurry. The escape. Ethan grabbed a small pack from the tent, stuffing it with essentials water, medical supplies, and his research tablet. He helped Lyra stand, her arm draped over his shoulder for support. Together, they fled into the night, the sandstorm still raging behind them. The howling wind masked their footsteps, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters adapted. Their technology was too advanced. They'd find a way to track them. As they ran, the desert stretched endlessly before them, an unforgiving expanse of dunes and jagged rock formations. The twin moons cast a pale light over the landscape, their glow reflecting off the faintly shimmering glyphs etched into Lyra's skin. After what felt like hours, they reached a rocky outcrop that provided some shelter from the wind. Ethan helped Lyra sit, her breathing shallow but steady. You okay? He asked, crouching beside her. Lyra nodded, though her glow had dimmed considerably. I will recover, but we cannot stay here long. They will find us. Ethan glanced back at the swirling storm in the distance. What were those guys after you for, anyway? What makes you so valuable? Lyra hesitated, her glowing eyes meeting his. The Allori. We are more than just survivors. Our kind possesses knowledge and abilities that many in the galaxy covet. They hunt us for our secrets. Secrets like controlling a freaking sandstorm? Ethan asked, half in awe, half in disbelief. Lyra smiled faintly. That is but one of many gifts. Ethan shook his head, a wry grin tugging at his lips. And here I thought this would be a quiet research trip. The ruins. Lyra's markings flared briefly, a sign that she was regaining her strength. She looked toward the horizon, her expression thoughtful. There is a place, not far from here, a sanctuary of my people. It may hold what we need to evade the hunters. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A sanctuary? Why didn't you mention this before? I did not think we would need it, Lyra admitted. But the hunters will not stop. If we are to survive, we must seek the sanctuary. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, lead the way. But if we run into any more surprises, I'm holding you responsible. Lyra chuckled softly, the sound warm despite their dire circumstances. Very well, human. Let us go. As they set off toward the sanctuary, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far greater than either of them had anticipated. Chapter 3. The Sanctuary Awakens. The desert's harsh terrain tested their every step. Ethan's boots sank into the shifting sand, his muscles aching from the effort of trudging through the endless dunes. Beside him, Lyra moved with an uncanny grace, her glowing markings flickering faintly as she pressed on. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Both knew the hunters were still out there, closing in. Ethan glanced at Lyra, whose eyes remained fixed on the horizon. How much further is this sanctuary? Not far, Lyra replied, her voice soft but steady. We will know it when we see it. Her cryptic answer did little to reassure Ethan, but he kept his doubts to himself. If Lyra's sanctuary was as significant as she implied, it might be their best and only chance of survival. The discovery. As the first light of dawn crept over the dunes, Ethan noticed a faint shimmer in the distance. At first, he thought it was a mirage, but as they drew closer, the shape of an ancient structure began to emerge. Towering spires of stone jutted out of the sand, their surfaces etched with intricate glyphs that glowed faintly in the rising sun. The air around the ruin seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. Lyra stopped, her eyes wide with recognition. This is it, she whispered. The sanctuary of Arathia. Ethan let out a low whistle. Impressive. What is it, exactly? It is a place of power, Lyra explained, her voice tinged with reverence. A haven built by my ancestors to protect our knowledge and those who sought refuge. Few know of its existence, and even fewer have entered. Ethan followed her as she approached the largest of the spires, its base partially buried in sand. A massive archway marked the entrance, its threshold guarded by two towering statues of Aelori warriors. The statues' glowing eyes seemed to follow them as they passed, a detail that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. This place gives me the creeps, he muttered. Lyra smiled faintly. It is not fearsome, only unfamiliar. Trust me. Ethan nodded, though unease still prickled at the back of his neck. Together, they stepped into the shadowed interior of the sanctuary. The Chamber of Secrets. Inside, the air was cool and heavy, carrying the faint scent of ancient stone. The walls were adorned with glyphs, their light casting dancing shadows across the chamber. Lyra moved with purpose, her glowing hands tracing the glyphs as though deciphering a long-lost language. What are you looking for? Ethan asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. There is a key, Lyra replied, her tone distant. A way to activate the sanctuary's defenses. If I can find it, we will be safe. Ethan watched as she worked, marveling at her focus. The glow of her markings seemed to synchronize with the glyphs, their patterns pulsing in harmony. It was as though the sanctuary recognized her, responding to her presence. After several minutes, Lyra paused, her fingers resting on a particularly intricate glyph. Here, she said, pressing her hand against it. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a low rumble filled the air. Ethan staggered, gripping a nearby pillar for support. What did you do? Lyra didn't answer. The glyphs on the walls flared brighter, their light coalescing into a single beam that shot toward the center of the chamber. A pedestal rose from the floor, its surface inscribed with yet more glowing symbols. This is it, Lyra said, approaching the pedestal. The heart of the sanctuary. Ethan followed her, his curiosity overriding his caution. What does it do? It connects to the sanctuary's core, Lyra explained. Through it, I can access the knowledge and power stored here. But it requires a bond-a connection between Aelori and another. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Another? You mean me? Lyra nodded, her glowing eyes meeting his. You have already shown your willingness to protect me. The sanctuary will recognize that. But the process is intense. Ethan hesitated. Define intense. Lyra's expression softened. You must trust me. The bond. Taking a deep breath, Ethan placed his hand on the pedestal beside Lyra's. The moment their hands touched the surface, a surge of energy shot through him. His vision blurred, and he felt as though he were being pulled into the very heart of the sanctuary. When his vision cleared, he found himself standing in a vast, glowing expanse. The glyphs floated around them like stars, their light pulsating in time with an unseen rhythm. Lyra stood beside him, her markings glowing brighter than ever. Where are we? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with awe. This is the sanctuary's core, Lyra replied. Here, our bond will be tested. Before Ethan could respond, the glyphs began to swirl around them, forming a vortex of light. Images flashed before his eyes, scenes from his past, moments of triumph and failure. He saw himself standing in his lab, poring over research. He saw the faces of those he had lost, the pain of their absence still raw. "You must face your truth," Lyra said, her voice echoing in the void. "Only then will the sanctuary accept you." Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. The images felt so real, so immediate, as though he were reliving them. But as the memories threatened to overwhelm him, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Focus," Lyra said, her presence grounding him. "You are stronger than this." Drawing strength from her words, Ethan forced himself to confront the memories, to accept them for what they were. Slowly, the vortex began to calm, the glyphs returning to their gentle glow. "You have passed," Lyra said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "The sanctuary accepts you." The glowing expanse faded, and Ethan found himself back in the chamber. The pedestal's light dimmed, but the sanctuary itself seemed to hum with newfound energy. "What now?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. "Now," Lyra said, her markings glowing softly, "we prepare. The hunters will come, but they will find more than they bargained for." A growing connection. As they explored the sanctuary's depths, Ethan couldn't help but notice how Lyra seemed more at ease, her confidence growing with each step. The bond they had formed in the core had created a new understanding between them, a connection that went beyond words. "You trusted me," Lyra said as they paused in a smaller chamber filled with ancient artifacts. "That means more than you know." Ethan shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You trusted me first." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of their situation faded. In the quiet of the sanctuary, surrounded by the glow of the ancient glyphs, they found a rare moment of peace. But both knew it wouldn't last. The hunters were still out there, and the sanctuary's defenses, while formidable, wouldn't be enough on their own. They would need a plan in each other if they were to survive what was coming. Chapter 4. The Final Stand. The sanctuary seemed to pulse with life as Ethan and Lyra prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The glyphs lining the walls grew brighter with every passing minute, their energy surging through the air like an unspoken promise of power. Deep in its heart, the sanctuary had become more than a refuge, was a fortress waiting to be awakened. Ethan adjusted the straps of his gear, his sidearm resting heavily at his hip. He turned to Lyra, who stood by the central pedestal, her glowing markings more vibrant than ever. The bond they had forged had invigorated her, and she exuded a quiet confidence that filled the room. "They'll come," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "And they won't stop until they have you or until we stop them." Lyra nodded, her gaze steady. "Then we will stop them. Together." The hunters' arrival. Outside the sanctuary, the desert had returned to its oppressive stillness. The air shimmered with heat, and the golden dunes stretched endlessly in every direction. The hunters' silhouettes appeared on the horizon, their sleek forms cutting through the haze like blades. They moved with precision, their plasma rifles scanning for threats as they approached the ancient structure. The leader of the group, his armor glinting under the twin suns, raised a hand to halt his team. "This is it," he said, his voice cold through the modulator. "The Aelori is inside. Secure the perimeter and prepare for entry." The hunters spread out, their movements synchronized and methodical. They activated scanning drones, small devices that floated into the air, their glowing sensors probing the sanctuary's exterior. One by one, the drones reported back, highlighting the main entrance as the only viable point of entry. "She's cornered," one of the hunters said, a smirk audible in his tone. "This'll be easy." The leader tilted his head, a faint hum escaping his helmet. "Do not underestimate her or the human. Prepare for resistance." Defenses awaken. Inside the sanctuary, Lyra placed her hands on the pedestal, her glowing markings syncing with the glyphs. The entire structure hummed with energy, and a deep, resonant sound echoed through its halls. Ethan stood nearby, watching as the ancient defenses began to activate. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tinged with awe. "Awakening the sanctuary," Lyra replied, her voice calm but firm. "It was built to protect those within. Its power will repel the hunters if I can harness it." Ethan frowned. "What happens if you can't?" Lyra glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. "Then we fight." The glyphs on the walls flared brighter, and the ground beneath them trembled. Outside, the hunters paused as the sanctuary began to respond. The sand around the entrance shifted, forming jagged spikes that jutted out like teeth. The glow from the glyphs extended outward, creating a shimmering barrier that pulsed with an ominous rhythm. The leader of the hunters stepped forward, his plasma rifle raised. He scanned the glowing barrier, his visor analyzing its composition. "It's an energy field," he said, his voice low. "Concentrate fire here. We'll break through." The hunters opened fire, their plasma bolts slamming into the barrier with deafening force. The sanctuary's defenses flickered but held, the glyphs glowing brighter with every impact. Inside, Lyra winced, her hands trembling against the pedestal. "They are strong," she said through gritted teeth. "Stronger than I expected." Ethan moved to her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger," he said. "Whatever this place has, it's because of you. Trust in that." Lyra nodded, drawing strength from his words. She closed her eyes, focusing her energy on the sanctuary's core. The glyphs responded, their glow intensifying until the entire structure vibrated with power. The assault. The hunters' relentless attack finally created a breach in the barrier. The energy field flickered and then collapsed, leaving the entrance exposed. The leader signaled his team, and they moved in, their rifles at the ready. The moment they stepped inside, the sanctuary retaliated. The glyphs along the walls erupted with light, sending waves of energy cascading through the chamber. One hunter was thrown back, his armor crackling with electricity. Another managed to fire a shot before being enveloped by a swirling vortex of sand that burst from the floor. "Keep moving," the leader shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The A-Lorry is in the central chamber." Ethan and Lyra heard the commotion growing louder as the hunters pushed deeper into the sanctuary. Ethan checked his sidearm, his jaw tightening. "They're coming." Lyra's markings flared, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Then let them come." The first hunter to reach the central chamber barely had time to react before a burst of energy shot out from the pedestal. The wave sent him flying into the wall, where he crumpled, unconscious. The others hesitated, their rifles raised as they scanned the room. The leader stepped forward, his visor locking onto Lyra. "Enough games," he said. "You're coming with us." Lyra raised her hands, and the glyphs responded. The ground beneath the hunters shifted, forming jagged spikes that rose toward them. The leader fired his rifle, the plasma bolt slicing through the air, but Lyra moved with inhuman speed, evading the shot. Ethan took aim at another hunter, his sidearm firing a precise energy bolt that struck the target's rifle, disabling it. "You want her," he called out. "You'll have to go through me." The leader sneered, his helmeted head turning toward Ethan. "A human? You're out of your depth." "Maybe," Ethan said, his tone defiant, "but I've got a habit of surprising people." The turning point. The battle raged on, the sanctuary's defenses aiding Ethan and Lyra at every turn. The glyphs pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive, their energy weaving through the air like a symphony of light and sound. Lyra moved with grace and precision, her glowing markings amplifying her every action. She summoned waves of energy that knocked hunters off their feet, her connection to the sanctuary making her a force to be reckoned with. Ethan, though less agile, held his own. He used the sanctuary's terrain to his advantage, luring hunters into traps set by the shifting sand and glyphs. His sidearm found its mark time and again, each shot calculated and effective. But the hunters were relentless. Despite their losses, they pressed on, their leader driving them forward with ruthless determination. As the battle reached its climax, Lyra suddenly faltered, her glow dimming. She dropped to one knee, her breathing labored. "I cannot maintain this much longer," she said. Ethan rushed to her side, shielding her from a stray plasma bolt. "Then we end this. Together." He turned to the pedestal, his mind racing. The sanctuary's core, the source of its power, was their only hope. "What happens if we push the core to its limit?" he asked. Lyra's eyes widened. "It could destroy the sanctuary, and us with it." Ethan met her gaze, his expression resolute. "Then we make sure it destroys them first." The final sacrifice. With Lyra's guidance, Ethan placed his hands on the pedestal, channeling all his energy into the sanctuary's core. The glyphs flared brighter than ever, their light blinding as the ground beneath them began to tremble violently. The hunters hesitated, sensing the impending danger. The leader shouted, "Fall back! Now!" But it was too late. The sanctuary unleashed its full power, a cataclysmic wave of energy erupting from its core. The hunters were swept away, their armor disintegrating under the force of the blast. The desert outside trembled, the sand shifting as the sanctuary's power surged outward. When the light finally faded, Ethan and Lyra found themselves in the quiet aftermath. The sanctuary's glow had dimmed, its energy spent. The hunters were gone, their threat eradicated. Ethan helped Lyra to her feet, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. "We did it," he said, his voice soft. Lyra smiled, her glowing eyes meeting his. "We did." Epilogue. The sanctuary, though weakened, still stood as a testament to the Alory's resilience. Ethan and Lyra knew their journey was far from over, but for now, they had found a measure of peace. As they stood together under the desert's twin suns, Ethan couldn't help but feel a deep connection to the alien woman beside him. They were from different worlds, but in that moment, they were united by something far greater than either of them could have imagined. And as the wind carried the last remnants of the battle away, they looked toward the horizon, ready to face whatever came next together.